What's up, everyone? Today we have the pleasure of sitting down with Anthony Lamot, CEO and co-founder at DESelect. Anthony started his career as a CRM consultant at Deloitte, Belgium, where he got his first taste of Salesforce.com. He moved over to WIG as a business and tech consultant, where he continued advising companies on CRM, but also started expanding into Martech. He later joined 4C as a lead consultant for marketing automation, and he also took a turn in-house on a one-year contract as a marketing automation lead at Toyota Europe, where he rolled out Salesforce Marketing Cloud. During his consulting years, Anthony teamed up with his friend Jonathan, where they met at Deloitte, and they each started 3 startups from scratch, of which the first one was together. And in 2019, they joined forces again. Anthony, his co-founder, went all in on their 4th startup, DESelect. Today, over 1,000 organizations use the marketing optimization platform, including companies like T-Mobile, Volvo, Cornell University, and many, many more. Anthony, thank you so much for your time today. I'm really pumped to chat.
It's really awesome being here. I'm a huge fan of the show, so I feel I'm meeting my super rock star hero. So
Appreciate that. We've definitely checked out your podcast too. You're doing some great stuff as well. We'll link out to your show as well. I'm sure some folks are fans of the platform that you built on, and we'll be able to cross some listeners there. But I've also checked out your newsletter on LinkedIn. Some pretty cool thoughts from a founder, 4-time founder there. And one of the things I wanted to ask you right off the top was your advice on for aspiring founders is to just right off the bat quit their job as soon as possible after they've saved up a little bit, maybe a few months of expenses. And, John and I are kind of both in that boat, John earlier than me, but how do you attain that level of like 100% of confidence in your abilities to take that leap?
yeah, this is a really fun question actually, and hope maybe it helps you guys out. No, the reason why it's so important is because focus is everything in entrepreneurship, and if you still have the cushion and the comfort of some daytime job, you're just not going to be as focused. For the history buffs out there, I love the story of during the siege of Troy, how the ancient Greek king Agamemnon had the ships burned of the soldiers, so there was no way back. So they were all in, and that's a little bit how you have to think about it when you start your business. Now, to answer the other part of your question, how you attain 100% confidence, you don't. I think, maybe after a few times it gets easier, but there's always nagging doubts. There's always reasons not to do it, and you kind of just need to get over yourself. And this is where it's almost as if entrepreneurship is this kind of weird cognitive dissociation disorder or, multiple personality disorder. Because on the one hand, we all know the data and we know how few startups are successful by whatever metric you take. But for me as an entrepreneur, it's binary. We're going to make it, right? And you need to have that confidence for yourself because the going is going to get tough. It's not always easy. But you also need to radiate that passion to, I think, attract and inspire great people to work with you. And that's a huge part of the success.
Cool answer. I mean, we're obviously with the podcast and our own stuff thinking about like our next steps in our careers. One thing that I liked that you wrote about on LinkedIn was about this idea of selling your idea before you even write a line of code and how this increases your chances of success. I've read like the lean startup and this methodology, but I think this is it's a great grounding exercise for folks to be able to like, hey, does my idea actually pass a sniff test? It sounds cool to me, but beyond you and your mom, is this going to have any success? Walk us through the early days at DESelect and the network you had to pitch your ideas against.
Oh, so by the way, I love how you, JT, pointed out beyond your mom, because one of the recommendations I would give in reply to this question is read the Mom Test. If you haven't read it, it's a great, funny book. But and it actually will echo what I'm about to say. So sell before you build, what does that mean? Well, it's opposed to coming up with a great idea. I think there is the myth and the notion that entrepreneurs come up with a great idea and then just things fall into place. And it couldn't be farther from the truth. In fact, Phil mentioned in the intro, I had a few startups before and they didn't really go anywhere, to be honest. And that's because probably to a large extent because they start with great ideas. And so after those 3, I was like, okay, well, what's an actual problem laying in front of me? And I remember the moment like yesterday, I was sitting at one of my consulting clients, literally looking around. And I'm like, all these marketers are really frustrated with writing SQL to segment. Maybe I should do something like that. And guess what? That's the company we're talking about now. Now, beyond that, obviously, when we started, we were able to tap into our networks. Jonathan and I had been embedded in the Salesforce ecosystem for about 10 years, I think, at the time. And so I could just hit up my customers, and there was a relation, there was a credibility, but it was still more of a, hey, what's your challenge? And at the very end, we would show what we had in mind. And that magical moment came when one of my insurance clients at the time asked, oh, so how much does it cost? Could you make us a quote? And what was funny is that we hadn't written a single line of code at the time. And we're like, oh, maybe we should start doing that now, right? But it was such a cool moment because that was really the validation we were looking for. And beyond that, I think for anyone who's starting a startup, really tapping into the community that is around the challenge you face. For us, that was pretty easy because the Salesforce ecosystem is pretty strong with user groups and all that. So we were able to tap into that a lot.
Very cool. Yeah, I think that's great advice. I'm trying to think of like the earlier conversations that you guys had where you were just pitching this idea, having conversations, and like that first client that was like, oh, like how much would that cost? You're like, oh shit, like now we
Yes.
found something.
Exactly.
I wanted to ask you about like I guess the answer to why Martech is because obviously like you started your career in there and so did your co-founder. You're already embedded in the Salesforce ecosystem, like you said. But you've actually written about like the pace of change in Martech and how, like Scott Brinker's 11K plus tools. We talk a lot on the show about like the future of CDPs and the overlap of data tools, warehouse native Martech, email sender guidelines, Gen AI. Like there's so many things changing in our industry. And I'm curious your advice for folks that are listening who maybe already feel overwhelmed with their day-to-day stuff at their current job, who also have to stay on top of all of these things changing constantly. What advice do you have there, Anthony?
Right. Well, obviously they should all listen to Humans of Martech, right? And I'm only half joking because I do think there's been very interesting things discussed in this podcast, including the interview with Scott was fantastic. But you look, my answer is not going to be mind blowing or maybe super exciting. It comes down to constant learning, and yes, you have to carve out time for that. Or if you're passionate enough, do it in your free time. I obtained many of the certificates that I still hold today in weekends. One thing I would say though, especially when it pertains to Martech, is get your hands dirty. Get really hands-on with the tech, because in 5 minutes of messing around with a tool, you can learn so much more than whatever white paper. Because honestly, there's a lot of obfuscation in our industry, and it has to do a lot with product marketing and how things are presented. And honestly, a bit of a contrarian opinion maybe, but analyst relations aren't really working either. It still baffles me how many customers don't actually realize that many of these analyst relations providers are really pay to play, which is a bit of a shocking thing sometimes, but hey, it is what it is. Beyond that, I think beyond your individual learning, I do think from an organizational point of view, every organization should be spending about 10% of time, resources, and money on experimentation, because there's just yes, a lot of it is going to fail, but the few golden nuggets you find are going to be really tremendous in the long run. And then I would also say for anyone who's a professional or even entrepreneur, embed yourself in community. And I've mentioned that before, but going to user groups, maybe dinners, the one or two things you will learn, the one or two connections you will make, they can really have a dramatic positive impact on your career and on your learning. So that would be my advice.
I want to loop back to, and maybe some of the answers to my next question will be from your previous one, but like, it's almost like a hyperbole at this point, or cliche, to talk about the pace of change in Martech. It's a constant truth since I think all of us got into Martech way back when. What do you think are like the constant truths? Like, what hasn't changed? What hasn't changed about being skilled in Martech? Like, what do the top Martech, the top marketing operations folks, what attributes do they have that are just like future proofed, that aren't going to change?
That is a great question. I think they understand marketing, and that might sound very obvious, but honestly, I'm gonna admit, like, I came from the CRM side. I came more from I studied psychology originally, interestingly enough, but then I went heavily into tech, and so I came from a very consulting, CRM heavy side. I honestly only started to learn about marketing after a while, and if you don't really know what marketers are really trying to obtain, how their workflow looks like, what a campaign planning is. It's going to be very hard to have good technology that supports that. That's one side. That's your business colleague that you need to kind of serve as a from a marketing operations point of view, or at least you need to understand what the objectives, are. Maybe objections too sometimes, but that was an interesting Freudian slip of that tongue. But the other thing is then, and this is more on the IT side, I think understanding good architecture. One principle that I like to apply to my business, but also in our marketing department, is knowing when to decide fast and when to decide slow, right? And deciding fast, most of the decisions you have to make in a day, you can decide very fast. But ever so often, say lead assignment rules, say integrations between systems, say data model, these are decisions that you should take very slowly, because you can get it wrong. If you get it wrong, it's very painful to undo. And so you should really take a bit more time for those decisions. But other decisions, stupid example, maybe what's going to be the subject line or the color of the button, those can be taken very fast because they're easy to undo. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, very cool answer. I don't think it's as obvious maybe for some folks to say that, like, in marketing ops and Martech, understanding marketing is key to success here. Because like maybe in startups, obviously, like oftentimes these folks are wearing the same hat, the marketing ops person and the marketer, the content writer, they're all wearing the same hat. But in the enterprise world and bigger companies, oftentimes those teams are very detached. In the Martech team, in my experience, I've found there's a lot of engineers, a lot of data engineers, a lot of analysts, and folks that never wore the marketing hat. And they're servicing people that they've never worn their shoes. They don't really understand their world. So I think that's great advice, especially for folks in bigger companies. I wanted to ask you. You said that you checked out the episode we had with Sarah McNamara as well. We did a bunch of deep dive on Reverse-ETL and like the CDP composable versus packaged battle, and I thought of DESelect when I was looking back on some of those episodes, because I feels, at least like from my perspective, that you essentially built Reverse-ETL with DESelect before it was this mass concept. And maybe it was a little bit too early for the market, but I wanted to ask you, like, how did you have this foresight of the types of features, or maybe talk about like your thoughts on the composable versus traditional platform architectures, considering that like you were pretty much a predecessor to Composable, right?
Right, composable avant la lettre, like they would say in French. It's a very thoughtful question. I appreciate you asking it. So first off, I love the idea of Reverse-ETL. When that started becoming more of a hype, and there was a lot of messaging around that, and it started really a couple of years ago, I was like, oh wow, this is awesome. This is really smart. But I also understand that we are very different. And now, I will first say that, so in DESelect, we have a few modules. The module we're most well known for is segment. And essentially what that is an intuitive drag and drop that generates SQL and that executes it within your marketing automation platform. And we stuck with Salesforce because, multiple reasons, but amongst others, it's our background. Now, we have often toyed with the idea of adapting it to other platforms. In fact, I think we're still open to things like strategic partnerships to maybe apply the SQL generation bit to other platforms. And this could be, this maybe marketing automation platforms, Reverse-ETL solutions, even data warehouses themselves, even CDPs, right? Even CDPs. Having said that, I think there's a big philosophical difference. And what Reverse-ETLs do, and they do it great, is that they can tap into the wealth of a data warehouse, and then they can essentially stage data. And so I would say there's somewhere at a staging layer there to be consumed by marketers who are then going to do campaigns of that at the execution layer. And that's the difference. We sit at the level of execution. Our segmentation is embedded. And this is really because that's where we saw the customer need for our customers. They needed segmentation at the level of their campaigns. They wanted to be able to use the engagement data as it came in, and they didn't always have real-time syncs between their data warehouse, maybe CDP or whatever. And so that's what really drove that. But there's really two reasons, by the way, why you do want to have something at the level of execution, and that's where we position our MOP, our marketing optimization platform. First off, organizationally. So Reverse-ETLs have this occurs less so than data warehouses and CDPs maybe, but typically it's not the marketing team, maybe not even the marketing operations team that is managing this. Very, very often it is still the BI team, the IT team, or who knows, maybe in a third party. And what happens in organizationally is that the marketer, they go to that technical team, whoever they are, and they go like, make this segment, and then they're already doing a sprint. So now you gotta wait 2 weeks, and then they come back and then they work on it. And then, oh wait, something was missing in the briefing. So you get this annoying, we call it targeting ping pong between two parties, and it just deteriorates your campaign velocity. And I think that the main thing that gets missed is that the marketers don't learn to understand their data, and that makes them worse marketers. It's like this huge missed opportunity, and we see this over and over again, where marketers who get hands-on with data become better marketers and are very happy. That's reason number one, that's organizational. Reason number two has to do with functional. So I had this conversation with a customer of ours, major fast-moving consumer goods. You've used their products maybe today. And so they were describing this use case where they want to do orchestration from the CDP. Okay, cool. Now, to a large extent, you can do that. And I know in their case it's CDP, but Reverse-ETL, it will be a similar thing where you're talking about where are you staging data. Anyway, so they were thinking about doing orchestration for certain journeys from the CDP, but it was super easy to poke holes into that. So like, imagine, for argument's sake, you push the data through, you got a journey with whatever, 3, 4, 5 cents, doesn't matter. If I want to prevent the third message in that journey to go out to say, Phil, how can I do that? Now, yes, technically you can do that. You can create an API, you can create suppression lists, but if you have to do it for every campaign, for every send, for every use case, it is practically impossible. Practically impossible. So you need something that can actually intervene at the level of execution. And that's why I love Reverse-ETL. I think it's a great idea. It's not us. We are different. We sit at the level of execution and we sit there very comfortably creating tons of added value for our customers.
Very cool. Great answer. Yeah, I won't steal the credit for that question. I'll give a shout out to Pratik Desai. He's the one that poked me and had you on referred to have you on the show, and he was like, "Oh, you should ask Anthony about this." So yeah, really cool to hear your thoughts on that.
Amazing. Pratik is one of the smartest people I think I've met talking about this kind of stuff. I think I met him first in person. We flew into New York to meet him in person, and I think we spent 3 hours in front of a whiteboard coming up with alternate architectures. I'm pretty sure I still have pictures of those whiteboards somewhere.
Amazing. Those are probably worth a lot of money someday. You should sign them and print them.
As long as they start from customer problems and not from great ideas, maybe. Yeah.
Switching gears a tiny bit here, but the idea of personalization and marketing, I wanted to ask you about this a little bit. I know I feel flooded with marketing messages with ChatGPT and generative AI. I know it's a bit cliche, but marketing and marketing campaigns in my mind are becoming like very disposable. Like it's so cheap and easy to come up with something that's kind of pseudo, almost personalized. But I'm finding this is almost at this level of boilerplate marketing messaging. So I want to take it back a little bit and ask, just from your perspective, what is a true personalization in marketing? And how can marketing teams actually set themselves up for success with this type of human connection with their audience?
Yeah, I mean, I totally recognize what you're saying, JT. I get so many spam emails. My finger is bleeding just from hitting the spam button over and over and over. Well, first off, I also think the question of what kind of personalization should we do is a great question that more marketing operation teams should ask themselves before they start doing it. I feel a lot of decisions are feature driven, like, oh, we can use this content block, but I think you should take a step back and think about strategy. And one example that a good friend of mine once gave, this was at Toyota Japan, or at least the example is from Toyota Japan, where apparently after a few years, they would have a rep hit the streets, knock someone's door, ex-customers, and they would hand them a rose as a thank you for being a customer. Now, there was some smart stuff behind that campaign too, because it allowed Toyota to also see, are people still driving the Toyota? Because for a manufacturer, it's kind of hard to keep track, right? But it was so personalized. And I love this example because it kind of breaks the frame and the mind even of many people in marketing operations. Because when we think about marketing operations, we think about, oh, super smart, dynamic content driven based on all the data integrated from multiple sources. But that's great. It is fantastic. But real personalization is human touch. And that goes back to the strategy. Are you one-on-one personalization like Toyota Japan's roses apparently? one to few, which could maybe mean make industry specific content. That's what we do for certain industries, right? Like we see a lot of engagement in financial services, higher education, automotive. So we create content for those parties, right? That's one to few, or just one to many. And there's nothing wrong with one to many, right? Especially if you're in B2C, it's probably what it's going to be. But I think that's question number one. And then from there, things will flow a little bit more easily, and you can hopefully still see the forest between the feature trees.
Very cool. I love that Toyota Japan example. I don't know if I'd be super excited about getting a rose at my front door, but maybe maybe an iPad or something a bit fancier. But I
Right.
love the point about like personalization is human touch. Like it's doing one-to-one stuff. And I know you guys think a lot about this idea of over messaging people and messaging fatigue. Your team ran a survey to analyze consumer behaviors related to marketing emails, and main takeaway for me was people value promotions. And even though a lot of our fingers are bleeding from hitting the spam button, there is value in a good promo email at the right time based on like some of the stuff you were doing online. But there's too many emails, and there's no way of saying it differently than too many emails absolutely can harm your brand. So how do you recommend marketers to manage this message fatigue tipping point that you kind of looked at, and maybe like talk about the indicators that marketers should be looking at, and what thoughts do you have around like the saturation of emails and why customers are just like so damn exhausted about marketing emails these days?
Yeah, great question. Great way to frame it too. Yeah, the report you're referring to is an annual state of marketing report we do. You can find on our website for those who are interested. And it's interesting to see how the trends evolve over time too for us. But to answer your question about saturation and determining the right level of fatigue, or ideally to prevent that. So the way we see customers often do it wrong is, oh, it feels right to send 3 emails tops per week. It feels right to do one survey per week. I'm like, yeah, that feels right, but is it true? So the right way to do it, or the better way to do it, is to actually look at engagements, opens, clicks, unsubscribes, or lack of opens and clicks. I think there's a lot of junk in people's database, and there's a lot of vanity metrics in saying, oh, we did a send to whatever, 1 million subscribers, but maybe 30% of them are already checked out from the beginning. But that's another subject. But based on that engagement, you can then determine ideal saturation levels. And what is really interesting is that how big of an impact that makes. That was counterintuitive to me personally. So we're all talking about personalization. We're all talking about targeting. I mean, obviously we swear by it too, because we've created tons of added value for our customers by offering functionality around it. But what I had underestimated, and actually it makes sense when you think about it, is that timing is everything. So the moment someone receives a message is so key. So building that engagement is great. You could even take it a step further if you have your buyer behavior, purchases, donations maybe, and ideally in the map, in the marketing automation platform, again, at the level of execution. Now, and this data you can use to figure out, okay, am I not oversaturating people? However, it's not just about oversaturating. And that's the other thing I didn't expect when we set on this course. It's really Goldilocks. The soup shouldn't be too cold, but it also shouldn't be too hot, right? It's like there's a perfect temperature here. And what we have found with some customers, one of them is actually a success story on our website. People can find it's the Brain Tumor Charity. It's a nonprofit, and they found by spreading out the communication, they were able to increase donations. So this is not just an efficiency bit. This is not just, oh, I want to have less unsubscribes. This is actually a revenue driver, and that was pretty amazing for me.
Very cool. I wanted to ask you about like this idea of send time optimization. Like I feel like you teased that out a little bit. These like ML powered send time optimization features in marketing automation platforms have been around for a while, right? Like alongside like ML powered lead scoring. How valuable do you think those have evolved to becoming today? And do you think that the future is like propensity based modeling for emails? Like we've chatted with some folks on the cast who are consultants with big enterprise, and they've gotten a taste of those big enterprise companies. Like we had Paul Wilson on the show who worked at Salesforce, and he was like, Salesforce doesn't do these like batch and blast campaigns. Like there is no marketer who's coming up with content and then sends that out to a segmented list of people. There are marketers who create content, and then there is an ML machine and an AI machine that decides what content should be sent to what people at what time, and what should the next piece of content be, and when should that be sent out. So I'm curious your take there. Like how much of your customers are still doing this like rule-based automation way of sending stuff where they're deciding, they're playing that Goldilocks, looking at engagement data, deciding what the frequency is, versus just like letting AI take the wheel and maybe just like monitoring some of that stuff a bit?
Yeah, I would be surprised if there were customers that were fully doing it with AI. I think even with great AI, there needs to be a human-centered at the decision making. So you don't have to change the name of your podcast just yet. But look, I think even in the companies that do have that level of maturity, honestly, there's still a lot of ad hoc segmentation happening. Think, for instance, about events. Like there are timely activities where you just cannot act fully automate it. And with our customer base, it really depends on the industry. For instance, in higher ed, you have a lot of enrollments, a lot of timely data, and for that reason, you see a lot of ad hoc segmentation, and it makes sense. In a tech company, we see a lot of customers that create segments and they automate them. So it's really interesting to see on the usage graph. They start off with like some small ad hoc segments, like, oh, this tool works great, and then that ramps up, which tells us, okay, they've implemented as a standard process now. And then afterwards, suddenly the automation shoots up when they realize, oh, I can automate all of this crap, right? And so that's what they do. I think scent optimization, to get back to that topic, it's great. In Salesforce, there's already something built in called Einstein scent optimization. Seems to work pretty fine. We integrate with it, and I think it can definitely add on. I think the only tricky bit there is, as with many things in marketing operations and marketing automation, is how do you measure it, right? So you would almost have to, maybe if you A/B split your journeys and have half of them go through scent optimization, the other half not, that would be a way to do it. And I do think you have to measure that, if only because it's so freaking hard for MOPS to explain the value they bring to the rest of the organization. And this has come up in many conversations with our customers. And obviously, we have to justify our value to our customers. It's a very complicated subject. Marketing, especially marketing operations, is the most data-driven function in a company, and people underestimate that.
Super cool answer. I mean, we're already talking about it, but customer segmentation. I want to just get your take. I know at DESelect, you guys help customers with segmentation strategies, but when I was a marketing operations consultant setting up these segmentation strategies, like, it sounds complicated to a lot of customers, but I think there's a crawl, walk, run approach that a lot of organizations who are successful with this. What do you see as the most common mistakes with folks on the ground, and how can people get up and running in a kind of a more sophisticated way in this Gen AI driven world?
Yeah, love that you point out the crawl, walk, run model. It's something I've been advocating since I was a consultant. Well, I think the number one thing is assuming you need perfect data. I've seen so many organizations have inertia or projects just coming to a stop because they felt they didn't have perfect data. But newsflash, nobody does. Trust me.
Exist.
It doesn't. Yes, doesn't exist. There is no perfect data. And what you need to, and of course, I'm not saying you shouldn't do data governance, data cleaning, data stewardship. You should do all of that stuff, and you should aspire to quote unquote perfect data. But it shouldn't stop you in the meanwhile. What are you going to do? Not send campaigns, not segment, not targets? Oh, we're not going to personalize because our data is not perfect. Well, what? So I think there's ways around that. And so whether you're staging your data with Reverse-ETL or something like DESelect immediately embedded in your marketing automation platform, there's ways to work around that. The one thing, though, that I would say that you do need, and that might cause, unfortunately, delays for marketing operations, you do need good integration between your systems. Not perfect, again, but good enough so that you're not, again, dependent on other teams to do segments or create lists for you, which is the very old school way from the SaaS days when someone would make a list and send it over, and you had no idea how that list was made, right? So I do think good integration helps, if only for workflow efficiency and so on. But I mean, the idea of the marketing maturity model is something we not just believe in, we actively practice it at DESelect. And we've created our own 3M model, simply marketing maturity model, less of a mouthful. And what we've done is we've been able to map our whole customer base on basically this graph, personalization versus automation. Of course, with a data lens to it. But basically, we can tell customers, well, this is you. This is how you compare to your industry, to your edition of DESelect. And it's really cool because it spontaneously led to us doing, and this is very new. This is very new. Like only this year did we start doing this. Basically, peer-to-peer virtual roundtables. For instance, we have one with higher ed now. We have one for the hospitality industry, and we're really bringing customers together. We're not charging for this, right? We're not charging for this. This is like a value add we bring to our customers. We love talking with our customers, getting to understand them better. And we've seen there's tremendous value in connecting them. And then they can understand, oh, why am I dangling at the bottom of that graph? And now how do I get there? So how do I learn to walk or run? So that's it.
Very cool. Love that idea of connecting customers from similar industries, because there's no shortage of sharing ideas, and like we call it mind sharing at our company. And like we're in such a niche industry. We're in the B2B2C model in health tech with HIPAA considerations and so many limitations with what we can do from a Martech standpoint. So even just like picking the brain from someone at a similar type of business model is just like changing the way that we think. So yeah, I love these like customer panels, or I think you call them like peer-to-peer groups. So yeah, that's really cool. On this topic of Gen AI, like we wanted to ask you a couple questions about ChatGPT. We've had a couple interviews with folks that had some really cool use cases for ChatGPT. A lot of folks are using it for various things, like more in the like cute category, like not super innovative. But some folks have some pretty cool ideas. Like we just chatted with someone, Steven Stouffer, who walked us through his presentation at Dreamforce, where he was basically connecting Tray.io with your marketing automation platform and pushing that to ChatGPT so you could parse auto reply data. So like think of all the manual stuff that you can leverage from like out of office responders. He's found a way to just like send that over to ChatGPT and then do something with it, parse it, update job titles, update like company names in Salesforce or whatever. But Mandy Thompson walked us through how she's basically been able to push email replies to ChatGPT to do sentiment analysis. So anyways, like the kind of snippets of some of the innovative stuff that we've seen. So I wanted to ask you, like, what are some of the coolest use cases you've come across so far with ChatGPT?
That's a great question. Well, I don't know if these are the coolest. First off, in my personal life, just for workout schedules, that's maybe a dumb one, but like there's some very
Nice.
glaringly obvious stuff that you can do in your daily life for which you can use it. So I thought it was a fun one. Another one that is very like recent for me, because right now at DESelect we believe in continuous improvement. We're also rethinking how we do our marketing. And maybe this example will stand out a little bit because it's not necessarily an ops example. It's more like a leadership organizational design example. I'm just engaging in conversation with ChatGPT in one chat, where, of course, I provide a lot of context on my role, the company, where we are at. But I'm helping it. I'm using it to help me think through organizational design, going from roles and responsibilities, incentive structures, cross-functional design, overall GTM teams alignment, and it is surprisingly useful. Of course, you have to be careful because you can very easily steer towards a certain solution. That's not necessarily the right solution. So you almost have to teach it to be its own devil's advocate, but you can. And I found that really interesting. What I would recommend, and it's also another thing I haven't seen people really do a lot, is that most people, when they think of ChatGPT, they think of the web version. Get the app on your phone, and obviously just get the paid version because basically the price of a premium sandwich. But it's a fantastic tool. But the mobile version has a conversational assistant, and it does something. There's just something about it, about user experience when you're actually talking to the thing. At least for me, I'm a person who can think by having conversations. That really helps me sometimes. So that's a useful tool in that way, I would say. So those are some GPT use cases that that I could maybe recommend.
Nice. I can see JT getting really up close to the mic
Oh
and
man.
getting excited about the
Oh,
conversational piece there. I know he's a
Oh,
big fan.
yeah, no, I have. It's funny you mentioned like 3 things that I use with GPT. The workout schedules. It's actually a great personal assistant that or fitness assistant. I have a business coach as well, and then I have an infrared sauna, and oftentimes I'm talking with ChatGPT. I'm a very curious person. I ask it like, how did the dinosaurs go extinct? Should I do for the next stage of my business? But I think that it's interesting, right? Like that idea of using voice. And I just want to go on a
really,
tangent here a little bit and get your thoughts on this too. It's just like once you start conversing with GPT and having it talk back to you, like there's something that happens, I don't know, in my brain that it becomes very personalized and I don't know, the conversational element I think is really interesting. And it
Mhm.
makes me think about the future of digital assistants and how we
Yeah.
can use AI. What are your thoughts there?
Oh man, how much time do you have? So look, I think the way these things work is because they kind of mirror what you're thinking, and that is because the way these things operate in my self-admittedly superficial understanding is that they're neural networks just like your brain. So how is it going to evolve? Look, let's get a little bit more futuristic here. I do think there's a few interesting trends that are happening in tech in a very wide sense. If you look at what Elon Musk is doing with his least well-known company, Neuralink, that's probably going to be the most impactful thing for humanity, where people are essentially making brain-machine interfaces so you can link up your brain to whatever, your garage door or somebody else to have a conversation, right? People don't understand just how much that is going to create. It's literally going to allow us to do magic. Now, what I've been thinking about and kind of brainstorming a little bit about is what if we can do that and we can connect each of our own brains to our own GPT, and we would essentially have more computing power. Like we could basically make every single human being on Earth smarter than all of humanity combined right now. I think that's literally what would make us superhuman, transhuman, whatever you want to call it. I think that's like further down the long vision than maybe you anticipated in my answer,
Mhm.
but I do see something happening in that direction.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating, like this idea of having your own personal digital assistant. I read this great article about this recently. It kind of was a little bit scary, to be honest with you. I think there's probably some people who think, is this a utopia or a dystopia? And how this plays out is going to be fascinating over our careers and our lifetimes.
Well,
Yeah.
maybe to people living in the medieval times today would be a dystopia too.
Oh
So
yeah, 100%. JT, I don't
Yeah.
know if you remember this, but like the 4-part episode that we did on AI, I think part 3 we were talking about like a future world where what are the marketers' jobs looking like, where AI is a lot more advanced, and one of those categories was this idea of a neuromarketing expert. And
Yeah.
like you said, like Elon is kind of all over this. Eventually, AI and neuroscience are going to converge in a big way, and they already are. And marketers could have access to like massive insights into consumer behavior and decision making that seem like sci-fi today, but like think of like emotions and thoughts, things you can do today, like obviously dive into like neuroscience and marketing applications of the future to just get this idea of like what the foundation of psychology and consumer behavior and how different that could look in probably like a more near future world than we're probably more comfortable to admit.
yeah, totally. I think we literally can't imagine it right now. We can, but we should try to anticipate and also deal with the challenges that will inevitably creep up on us, but or jump on us even. But it is super exciting. I do imagine like the future marketing operations person being some kind of wizard that is just using whatever AR device is most popular at that time to use their brain and just come up with campaign ideas. Bring it a little bit closer to today though. Like for instance, what we're already seeing in DESelect Engage is now people can plan their campaigns and they can fully anticipate the saturation on those campaigns based on the data we have. So some fun ideas we were thinking about is, for instance, like, oh, what if we had a button, and the way it will work is, Phil and JT, they come up with their 20 campaign ideas for the coming months, and they just list it, and then they press a button, and the button plans it out for them in the way that most optimized, right? So it's this like extension of your marketing capabilities. And it's going to be pretty cool, I think.
Wizards of Martech, JT. Anthony just validated your idea there.
I slack fill all kinds of wild ideas. My ambition in life is to be VP of sci-fi somewhere, probably about my own company. But it seems like sci-fi is coming true quicker than I could write it anyways. So here we are. One of the posts that I saw on your LinkedIn, and I actually thought, I kind of like nodded my head when I saw this, was about, and I know you're still working with an AI in your product, but like you pulled ChatGPT out of a segment of your product, I believe. And I was thinking to myself, like, this is, first of all, commendable. I think a lot of people are pasting AI on their products right now where it doesn't have a great use case. And I think having these strong use cases and developing, just like you did with your startup, like this lean startup style of, does this pass the sniff test? Does this pass my mom test? Does it make sense to have GPT in the product? Do you want to share some of your takeaways of integrating with ChatGPT and how this is going to shape your approach to AI in the future?
Yeah. Thanks for pointing out that post. I'm glad you liked it, because I was actually, it's a very it gives a very deep look into the company and our thinking, but in light of trust and transparency, I felt it was the right thing to write about that so publicly. Now, don't get me wrong, when ChatGPT, became more of a thing, we also jumped on it, right? I grabbed my co-founder, Jonathan, and I'm like, dude, we have to do something with this. If only to try it out. But we have now totally tried it out. And the conclusion is that it actually doesn't create that much added value for our customers. So for context, specifically what we did is that I already explained that DESelect segment, that module allows you to create SQL with an intuitive interface. So we're like, oh, what if you could just like scream at your laptop what segment you want and it would just come out? Great. Now, as it turns out, because every data model is so different, there's so many edge cases and it never comes out just quite right. And that deteriorates user experience and trust, right? But then even more to the point, you're actually not that much faster. It turns out our interface is already pretty intuitive and fast and just much more detail oriented. So, okay, limited value for customers. It feels already more than a gimmick than an actual value add. And then if you look at the engineering that it takes, obviously a bit of a new domain for everyone. So it just consumed so many more engineering hours, plus the OpenAI API is still changing. Everybody knows that. So that makes it a little bit harder to work with. So final conclusion, super cool, fun, interesting. We can probably do more value adding stuff in the same amount of time. And that has taken us back to our frequency optimization and engage. And we spoke about that. And I do want to clarify, like, we still strongly believe in AI and different shapes and colors, but definitely including generative AI. We also still have our brand, DEAI. DD, for those who don't know, is our little penguin mascot. Anyway, so that brand still exists and we'll continue to release features underneath it, including for Engage. We have machine learning driven predictions for the ideal saturation point per subscriber. We call it personalized saturation control. And I'll just say, stay tuned for more.
Awesome. I think there's a lot of companies that should follow in your footsteps there and remove the write this with AI type of shit in their product. I don't need to write with AI in your product, just like I can in just ChatGPT right here on my desktop. But yeah, we're getting close on time. So wanted to give you a chance to talk a bit more about what you launched earlier this year. You're calling it the marketing optimization platform. I think that's a bit of a change from how you were branding the whole kind of slew of things that DESelect was doing. But you've added a ton of capabilities to the Salesforce Marketing Cloud platform over the last 5 years. And something I found interesting and what you teased a bit about earlier in the conversation is that you're open to this idea of building for Salesforce and beyond, but I think for now it's still Salesforce focused ecosystem, right?
Yes, mostly. Well, like everything we do, and you probably already got that, we start from customer need. And so we have discovered over time, hey, there's more capabilities here that actually make sense for us to build, because we just don't set out to build anything. But one thing that we've noticed is that customers would want to work cross-channel, right? And within Marketing Cloud, it actually supports multiple channels, email, text, mobile, but also channels beyond Marketing Cloud. And so for Engage, for instance, so that's the frequency optimization part, we already saw a need to integrate multiple channels. overall, this has led us to appreciate the fact that, we're no longer a point solution. That's how we started with DESelect segment, kind of haphazardly almost, but we have really evolved in this multi-capability platform. And I think just calling it an MOP resonates heavily with everyone in MOPS, because now you have your MOP to clean out whatever else you have. It's also very distinct from a marketing optimization platform. We have no ambition, as far as I can tell for now, to start doing the execution of Sense itself. We do plug in, we do integrate with that. We make it just super easy to work cross-channel. And I'll give you an example. Right now, we're working with a top 3 vaccine manufacturer, and they are using, like so many in the pharmaceutical industry, they are using Viva CRM. And so what they wanted to see is, what are the salespeople sending out? Pull it into DESelect so that the marketing team can adjust their communication strategy based on that. So we're literally already today beyond Salesforce, because
Very cool.
Viva, yeah, thanks. So I would still say we're a Salesforce first company currently. Most of our product development is oriented on that, and currently most of our GTM is there. I would also say one other thing, the MOP thing. It's also interesting because it's really, again, from customer need. And one thing that I think actually your listeners might really appreciate is that late last year, Jonathan and I, we set out to interview leaders and experts in marketing operations. And so we have conducted 57 in-depth interviews behind closed doors. But we do have a report, anonymous, of course, for confidentiality reasons, but we're about to release that to the wider audience. The participants already have it. They have a more extensive version too, but we're going to release a public-facing version. We're going to do a webinar about that. It's going to be called the Industry Reports on MOPS, something to that tune. And it should be available soon.
Nice. We'll make sure to link that out at the bottom of this episode by the time it drops. Maybe it'll be out already, but if not, we'll add it when it does get released. So if you're listening to this and you're curious about finding it, check out the show notes or the blog post version of this. JT, round us out with our last question.
Yeah, this has been a blast, Anthony. Thanks so much for joining us. Tons of gratitude for the hour you got to spend with us. I'm thrilled to have been interviewed with you. It's an awesome, interesting podcast interview, I think. But one question we ask all of our guests, you're a co-founder, a CEO, a novice camper, a techno EDM festival frequenter, so you owe me some music recommendations after this.
Sure.
One question we ask all of our guests is, how do you remain happy and successful in your career? How do you find balance?
Yeah, thanks for asking. First off, I'm maybe not the best person to ask about balance, and I even think work-life balance is maybe not the right phrase, especially not when you're in tech, and especially not when you're an entrepreneur. So I like to think about work-life integration, how your work and life flows into each other. Well, let's say on the business side, what still gives me a lot of energy is, not surprisingly, talking with customers. I generally do enjoy that. I get energy out of that. And I think the moment as a founder you don't, it's going to be problematic, right? Because it's probably what you should be doing a lot. So that's on the business side. On the personal side, I mentioned briefly, I have a background in psychology. And look, there's only a few things that really make you happier, as it turns out. First, money, but only up to a point. Once you got your basic needs covered, it really doesn't make a difference. And so basically everyone listening to this podcast is not going to make more of a difference, right? Second, genetics. That kind of sucks, because at least for now, you can't change it, right? But it is what it is. Some people are just literally born happier than others. So it seems. But then the other thing that I think I retained this from some TED Talk I once saw, and it was really interesting. And this was done on really good psychological research into happiness. And the takeaway was, appreciation is one of the only things you have control over that can increase your happiness. So on that note, I would, if I may, do a little shout out.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, so one of the things we are all very appreciative for our customers, because we do work with fantastic brands and logos like Volvo or Cornell, and we wouldn't be here without them. And then, of course, our team. We make it look easy, but it's really not, right? We really worked super hard, and I do want to recognize that many of our team members are just fantastic, hard workers, smart, and not least amongst them, my co-founder Jonathan, who's been on this very wild, very exciting ride with us. And lastly, our investors. We have a great investor in our venture capital investor, lead investor, Adjacent, been a fantastic partner, and we have multiple people as angels on our board who run unicorns themselves, and being able to soak in that knowledge and know-how has been exhilarating. So thank you all. And this is making me happier.
Love it. I think that's a great answer. Appreciation is something that I think all of us could do a little bit more. I think a previous guest talked about like a gratitude journal where before bed every night they write down 3 things that they're appreciative of, and they try to make it something different every time. And you
I do
look at
that.
it after a month or so in the journal, and it's so yeah, that's great advice. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you so much for your time today. It's a super fun chat.
It's been great. Thank you, guys.